Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. The Indian economy is estimated to grow at 7% in the 2022-23 fiscal, down from 8.7% a year ago. As per the first advance estimates of national income released by the National Statistical Office, this slip is mainly due to poor performance of mining and manufacturing sectors. The manufacturing sector output is estimated to decelerate to 1.6% in the current fiscal from 9.9% back in 21-22. Similarly, mining sector growth is estimated at 2.4% in the current fiscal as against 11.5% in 21-22. Although the current projections are lower than the government's earlier forecast of 8 to 8.5% growth, they are above the RBI's projection of 6.8%. Remember, the Reserve Bank had lowered the country's GDP growth forecast from 7% to 6.8% for the current fiscal, owing to the continued geopolitical tensions and also tightening of global financial conditions. So we'll analyze the difference in forecasts, also growth projections for different sectors, and the challenges ahead with distinguished panelists joining us on the program. Pleased to have in the studio with us Mr. Shubhamay Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor, The Business Standard. Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharjee, for your time. Welcome to the program. And joining us virtually are Mr. R. Gopalan, former Secretary, Financial Services, Ministry of Finance, and Mr. Rajiv Mantri, founder and MD, Navam Capital. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this edition of the program. Mr. Gopalan, let me begin the program today with you. The first advance estimates by the NSO project a 7% growth. Is this on the expected lines?
Well, from various indicators that came about during this year, this was expected. Manufacturing was, in any case, showing not a very good sign. Right. Then mining and others were also not very good. And services were just picking up. So it was expected that this would really come down this year, and it has come down. There are 2-3 issues under which one would like to assess this. One, intersect between various components of the economy, how things have moved or shifted. Second will be what the budget holds, what these numbers will influence the budget as. And third one will be what does it hold for us in 23-24. So these are some of the things which we should look at it if we have the time. But basically, the fact remains that there is a slowing down, and I believe that this will get reflected in 23-24 as well.
Right. Mr. Bhattacharjee, so coming just ahead of the union budget, how significant are these numbers, the estimates of the NSO?
Well, taking on from what Mr. Gopalan was saying, 2 things very important. First of all, there is a lot of, we are seeing the deceleration. But the interesting thing to remember is, these are the first advance estimates. Our history of statistical correction, which typically happens, because remember, there will be a revision of this number in May this year, then again next year, and there will be subsequently 2 more. So at least 3 more, usually 5 revisions happen. And all, if you look at the revisions of GDP that happens, the interesting thing is that it actually almost changes by almost 1 percentage point. So 7% could actually, when it finally the numbers are sort of, taken on as the final numbers, could actually be closer to 8. And that's a significant thing. A growth rate of closer to 8 for FY23 is actually something which is very impressive. So even as 7% is good. So that's so I would say that the numbers would be, we should be looking at what the subsequent numbers. But the point about that you said about the budget would be something that the important thing to see there is what is happening on inflation. The interesting thing is that the inflation, the nominal growth rate that we are looking at is 15.4%, which means the Indian economy, despite the rise in the value of the dollar, has actually still recorded a nominal, there's an inflation growth rate of, has been fairly high. So which means that the terms of trade has been become even more adverse. Now that's important because it actually shows that the headwinds have become far more stronger from globally. So 2 takeaways from this data shows that, first of all, that first correction that I talked about, 7 to 8% shows that the Indian economy per se is not doing bad. The recovery has been taking place and the recovery is actually starting to rise and will actually look better. The second thing is that the global headwinds are possibly even worse. So for 23-24, these are going to be even more severe factors to be accounted for. And that is what Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will be taking on, because when she decides that what are the numbers that she'll be doing, fiscal deficit, then a capital account, capex growth rate that she'll be looking for, these are the constraints that she'll be looking for. That the Indian economy, it's fine. The rest of the world, the headwinds are looking as bad, probably worse in beginning of 23 than in the beginning of 22.
Right.
I'll leave it at that point.
Okay. Mr. Mantri, your perspective on how these, global headwinds are not just persisting, but emerging stronger and which could obviously be problematic for us. How do you see them posing spillover risks to India's macros?
No, so if you look at the situation, particularly in Europe, I think their economies are really struggling. So certain of our export industries are probably going to be hit by that. So if you have a slowdown or a recession of a severe nature in Europe in 2023, chances are that the Indian companies for whom, in the auto sector, on the IT sector and so on, for whom Europe was a key focus market, they could see difficulties in this year. And obviously that will have downstream or other, that will be a result of production challenges which will come up because of weakened demand in Europe. And net, I feel obviously no one knows when it will end, but the situation, the military situation in Europe has taken a bigger toll than most would have anticipated. And the war has gone on longer than most people would have thought. So until things stabilize on that front, it will continue to be a difficult situation for some of the export industries of India.
The export sector is already under immense pressure, Mr. Bhattacharjee. But do you somewhere also see the business confidence also having taken a hit because of this prolonged uncertainty? One after the other, we've been seeing these global headwinds. So after the Russia crisis, and of course, before that, the pandemic as well, because of which the supply chain disruptions. So we've been able to recover, but because of these persisting headwinds, the recovery and the expansion has not been as fast as we would have anticipated. And if they continue to, persist and become stronger, as you said, in the coming year as well, will the business confidence also be impacted somewhere?
Well, that's a very interesting point that you raised. Why? Because at the beginning of this year, and I was wondering that I should have brought my copy of my Business Standard, the first day's news about the Indian economy's business was rather cheerful. And that is exactly what the point I'm saying. If you look at the auto sales, even two-wheelers, the falling off has been arrested. Three-wheelers is actually recovered. If you look at the services sector, the contact-intensive sectors, which were once hurt by COVID, people were not going out. There's been a recovery. The services sector growth rate, according to the PMI, Purchase Managers Index, has run to a 10-month high. If you look at any other indicators coming from within the Indian economy, they're all looking very bright. Now, but yet, as you said, private investment is not taking place. Why is it so? Because, as Mr. Mantri pointed out, the problem that's coming along is that a company, if it wants to expand capacity, if it is solely depending on domestic demand, that will be okay. But most of our industry, and rightly so, will have a strong export consignment to think about. And those export consignments are not really looking very bright. So the headwinds are therefore just from there.
Right.
And that is the thing that we are trying to work out, that which is why you find a very critical number, which economists are talking about, and I'm sure Mr. Gopalan will be talking about, the private capital expenditure is not picking up. It is something which the government has been pushing. The government has been, because the government capital expenditure has been high, but the private capital expenditure has not been high. And despite the fact that the capacity utilization is now almost reaching 80%. This is a time when you would expect private sector to actually start expanding, talking about new construction projects to take up. But that's not happening. So that is something that is a cause for worry, and that is where we shall be hearing more in terms of what further steps can be taken on. And this is a structural challenge of a new type for the Indian economy. We never had this sort of a challenge. We used to have challenges of different sort, supply constraints, lack of capital, lack of labor. This is a very, I should say, a economy of the size that India has become. This is actually a very smart sort of a development. So we shall actually have to be looking out for new ways in which to create solutions to those. And that's where I'll stop.
Okay, Mr. Gopalan. So, in the face of these newer challenges, what are the newer solutions that actually we are looking at, and we should actually be going forth in order to navigate these challenges?
Let me take from what
Sure.
Subhamay has left off. There is another aspect which should be watchful of regarding the consumption. The consumption in the rural areas is not really, picked up. It is trying to pick up, but not really, getting us the traction which we are required to have. So that has an effect on investment, especially private investment. And therefore, that is going to be an issue, how the confidence of the consumers are able to really come into discretionary buying. With the CPI levels, with the core CPI levels being what it is and CPI numbers what they are, it is going to take some more time for that to really help in the consumption. Now, meanwhile, how the incomes are going to go up is something where it comes through government investment. For instance, if the government is going to do investment in more on the rural infrastructure, which is labor intensive, obviously, the labor share of the pie will really go up, which will give them enough income to go ahead for consumption. So that is the way the kickstarting, or they already started, but it has got to expand a little bit more before the private sector really thinks the 75% capacity utilization is just good enough for them to go in for further, capital investment. Well, that's going to take some time. The confidence surveys which Subhamay mentioned are very split. They are not, in a sense, for the consumer side, the investment side, and all those kind of things. They are a mixed picture which is giving at this point in time. And with the headwinds which are going to come in with this, it's going to be a problem, at least for in the near future. So what are the structural changes that are required to be done? Well, there are quite a good number of things which government is hoping on. For instance, how to ensure that the private sector is induced to invest. So how to create conditions for them to feel confident that they can invest and make money out of this. So, and how to ensure that ease of doing business is something which is taken more seriously by the government, and how the government is able to invest in other things like skills development, the hard infrastructure issues, how the digitization spreads very fast. And these kind of things will really, help a great deal in ensuring that the growth really takes off the way it should.
Mr. Mantri, the fact that, the new year started with a lot of hope and positivity, the fact that India has been in a relatively better, spot as compared to the other leading economies, but the challenges will continue to emerge stronger. And we've discussed as the global headwinds continue to persist, the forecasts continue to be revised. So the IMF brought down its numbers, the RBI had to bring down the numbers. But at the same time, we need to also leverage our strength, existing strength, and that is on the services export sector. The Deputy Managing Director of the IMF had said that, in order to do so, we need to extend it to job-rich manufacturing exports by deepening the global value chain participation, complementary structural reforms that we just spoke about, which will boost productivity, formal employment, and exports. All of this sounds very good, but in the face of these challenges, the fact is structural reforms is something that the government is taking care of. But on the export sector, the widening gap that we are continuing to see, this is something that is going to be extremely difficult.
So no doubt that I think India has done very well. If you look around the world and look at the state of other countries, even in our own neighborhood, the Southeast Asian economies, the other South Asian countries, we are really actually an island of kind of excellence or island of stability in this region. We are able to register 7% growth in a year like this, where frankly most economies have really struggled. For the most part, inflation has also not been that severe in India. And overall, I think it speaks to the excellent economic management by the government that we managed to achieve this. Now, having said that, I do believe many of the structural reforms need to keep getting that impetus. For example, the labor law codes which were passed by Parliament are yet to be implemented by state governments, and we are still waiting for that to happen. I think it's been probably close to 2 years now since Parliament cleared them, but there is no actually nothing in the media or no information available as to when it might get implemented by states. And if we are looking to balance our economy, I think we are already sort of relying heavily on services exports. I'm not of the school of thought that more can be done on services exports. I do believe that India needs to build up manufacturing capabilities. And much has been done by the government on that front, actually, with the PLI schemes and other initiatives to bring up like domestic industry. So on the particular point of the dependency that we have on, for example, energy imports, which put a certain macroeconomic pressure on the country, I think government has also been doing everything that it can in terms of mobilizing sort of the sugar sector to go for blending of ethanol and achieve some level of blending so that we are able to reduce that marginal amount of oil import. And
Absolutely,
on the
you're
second
right.
front, one of the most exciting areas actually right now in the auto sector is in the uptake of electric vehicles. So if you look at whether it's two-wheelers, three-wheelers or four-wheelers, India is electrifying its transport, its vehicle base very rapidly. I think it is happening most rapidly with three-wheelers, then with two-wheelers, and then four-wheelers will take some more time probably because of the cost aspect. Like the electric vehicles tend to be more pricier, and what India actually needs is like a 4 lakh, 5 lakh electric vehicle. We have not got to that price point yet. So my view is we should keep doing whatever we can. There will always be certain global pressures and shocks like that. I mean, frankly, when has that not happened, right? Like if you look back over 15, 20 years, there's always been something or the other which is brewing and kind of disrupting as a force. But as long as we continue to do whatever we can, then we will somewhere come out ahead when the headwinds turn into tailwinds.
Okay, so that optimism, Mr. Bhattacharya, explains the transformation that India has seen with relative ease in several sectors. But when we talk about the structural reforms, how much of an important role does simplification of the goods and services tax have to play? That is one area that we've been speaking about, but it's not been implemented, it's not been done so far. So how much of a roadblock is that also causing?
That is quite something in the sense that the tax rates also. I mean, let's take cement. Cement gets taxed at 28%. Now, cement is both used by the individuals, house building by anybody, as well as by the industry. So that's the tax rate that frankly is something which is creating difficulty. But then it's also something on which both the center and the states have to come together. So GST reform, and if you mean on that context, reducing the sort of the what is called the basic rate to something like 14% or something, is something that's definitely going to be very good for the economy. There's no doubt about it. I would say that the one problem that's coming up and which has not been flagged is that the states, you remember this year, the central government has, and last year too, but this year definitely, has given about 1 lakh crore, that's 1 trillion, to state governments to jumpstart capital investment. From the data that comes up, it shows that the states have not really moved on it much. And I have a reason to understand why. The reason is states per se are very good at handling consumption expenditure. They are not, the state machinery, the state bureaucracy is not, almost in most states, very good at handling capital investment. And this is actually hurting. This year, we would expect the government to actually push more, central government to push more money to the states to push capital expenditure. But states that is one structural reform that is very necessary for the states to ramp up in the capacity within their bureaucracy to be able to take projects and deliver. This is something where the states have actually been not only lagging, but they've also been on defensive. They've not been coming up to say, where is the problem? PPP adjustments, I mean, public-private partnership, writing those things, getting those projects implemented. Most states have a tremendous backlog there. That is what you're seeing. Mr. Gopalan was talking about rural development not happening. Well, I can assure him one of the reasons why not happening is it's not about putting in consumption money. Investment by the state governments is not happening. And that is where a serious challenge has developed and needs to be sorted out. As I say, these are new economy challenges for India. Never used to happen earlier. We never had the cash to be able to give that money. Now the cash is there. It's not getting spent. So that's one major thing. A very good reform that the central government has done is being fiscally conservative. For the last 2 years, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has been presenting a conservative budget. We are very hopeful that she'll be continuing that trend because it's very nice to under-promise and over-deliver. And that is something that we'll be expecting this year. That will be very good for all round because it will push down the fiscal deficit. It will actually ensure that other pressures on the private investment do not come up, that the government is spending more. The government's borrowing calendar is actually making us hopeful that yes, that is what will be happening. You would have noticed that Citibank's latest report has said that the current account deficit of India, which they had pegged at 3.7%, they have scaled it down to less than 3%, which shows that the economy has been able to start balancing itself much more. So, I'm talking of the hard numbers. The only challenge that is there, which is because of the COVID gap, there's an output gap in the Indian economy. What Indian economy should have been at this stage compared to if the COVID had not happened. Right. That gap is naturally going to hurt the poor more because they are at their bottommost pay. And that is where the challenge is. But for that consumption to be actually brought back, several layers of the economy have to be working along. Of which I think one major thing which the state government is the state government. Remember, they account for 65% of the government budget, of the total government budget. It's not working as of now. So that's something that we need to work on. But that output, but even after that, there will be that gap, and that gap is the pressure point in the Indian economy in terms of the consumption, which will take a bit more time to clear through. But it was something which COVID had dealt, and we are doing. I mean, most sectors of the Indian economy have actually dealt with it far more responsibly than many other economies.
But since you spoke about hurting the masses, let me take one question on the inflation problem from Mr. Gopalan. Mr. Gopalan, from the common man's perspective, how big a worry is inflation going to be, both from our perspective and also from the perspective of RPI in taming inflation in the times to come?
Okay, let me, start off from what Subhamay left. There are structural issues which he pointed out in regard to state governments. There are state governments who have been able to very well implement the capital expenditure program. There are a good set of states, including states like Tamil Nadu, who have been doing quite a good amount of capital expenditure work. The problem there is that the capacity of the administrative system to absorb capital expenditure is very limited because of the way in which the private sector has to be pulled in by the states to get the capital expenditure conducted. It is not done by the state government themselves. It is pulled in by various contractors and others are able to be pulled in to get this expenditure done. That has not really taken off in some states, but in most states it has really happened. That's an encouraging sign I am seeing. On structural reforms, before I get into inflation side, there are issues relating to what I call that R&D issues, which have to be tackled. How to ensure that India as a system is able to improve its expenditure on R&D, which will enable it to really get into some innovative things, which can really push up the productivity side. Second thing I'm worried about is on the customs duty increase, which is taking place. It will hurt the supply chain seamlessly across all countries to ensure that competitiveness is ensured in our manufacturing. So that's an area where we must be very careful and be very, wise in doing that. There are some areas where it needs to be done, but there are some areas where we need to avoid. We should take a careful view on that. On the income tax side, I have a feeling that with the myriad things which are going around, if a direct tax code is going to be implemented, it will give so much of certainty to the income tax structure, which I think is going to be very useful for kickstarting investments. On the inflation side, as I see it, the inflation is because of the commodities prices are going down, and we see WPA showing signs of, deceleration very drastically. The inflation levels are going to really go down next year. I expect the CPI to be around about average for next year is likely to be about 5.4 to 5.5%. The core is the big problem for me. It will take another 6 to 7 months for the core inflation to really come down, which will enable people to, industry to pass on, the price, increases of inputs, but by the time input prices would have softened because commodity prices are softening. So generally, I have a feeling that in 23-24, there is going to be a good improvement in the inflation levels, and RBI will be in a position to work on that. Will be advantageous to them to look into how the repo
I
rates
think
are going to be adjusted.
let's all hope that there's no more tightening from the RBI, which eventually impacts our pockets. So with that, I'll have to wind up the program. Time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of Perspective. Thank you to all of you for joining us on this edition of Perspective, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you same time on Monday now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.